Day 4. Rewriting your internal narrative. By now, you have begun to examine two powerful forces that shape the course of every life. The patterns that influence your behavior and the beliefs that support those patterns. Today, we turn our attention to something that sits at the center of both, the story you tell yourself. Every person carries an internal narrative. It is the ongoing conversation that takes place in the background of daily life, often without conscious awareness. It interprets events, explains experiences, assigns meaning to successes and failures, and gradually shapes the way we see ourselves. Over time, this narrative becomes so familiar that we stop questioning it. We assume that because it sounds like our own voice, it must be telling us the truth. Yet the voice in our head is not always objective. In many cases, it is simply repeating conclusions we formed years ago. Imagine two people making the same mistake at work. The first person sees the mistake as evidence that they are incompetent. They spend days replaying the situation in their mind, criticizing themselves, and imagining how others must be judging them. The second person feels disappointed as well, but views the mistake differently. They see it as feedback, identify what can be learned, and move forward with a clearer understanding of how to improve. The event is the same, the interpretation is different, and that interpretation influences everything that follows. The story we tell ourselves matters because human beings do not respond only to events. We respond to the meaning we assign to those events. A setback can become a lesson or a life sentence, depending on how we choose to interpret it. A failure can become evidence of inadequacy or evidence of growth. A challenge can be viewed as a threat or as an opportunity to become stronger. Much of personal growth involves learning to recognize the difference between what happened and the story we have created about what happened. This distinction is often overlooked. A person may fail an exam and conclude they are not intelligent. Someone may experience rejection and conclude they are not worthy of love or respect. A business venture may not succeed, leading its owner to believe they are not capable of entrepreneurship. In each case, the event is real. The interpretation is optional. Unfortunately, the human mind has a tendency to transform isolated experiences into broad conclusions. One difficult moment becomes evidence of a permanent flaw. One disappointment becomes proof that future efforts are pointless. What begins as a temporary setback gradually evolves into part of a person's identity. The danger of this process is that the narrative eventually starts influencing future decisions. If someone repeatedly tells themselves they are not confident, they may avoid situations that would help them develop confidence. If they believe they are incapable of success, they may hesitate when opportunities appear. If they see themselves as someone who always gives up, they are more likely to abandon goals when challenges arise. The narrative becomes self-reinforcing. People begin behaving in ways that support the story, and the results they produce seem to confirm that the story was correct all along. Yet when we look more closely, we often discover that the story itself was the problem. One of the most valuable skills you can develop is the ability to challenge the narratives that no longer serve you. This does not mean replacing every negative thought with unrealistic optimism. It means learning to view yourself with greater accuracy and fairness. Consider how differently you might evaluate a close friend. If a friend made a mistake, you would probably not conclude that they were a failure. If they experienced a setback, you would not assume their future was ruined. You would recognize that one event does not define an entire person. Yet many people apply standards to themselves that they would never apply to anyone else. They speak to themselves with a level of criticism that would be unacceptable in any healthy relationship. Over time, this constant criticism shapes identity. It creates hesitation, insecurity, and self-doubt. It encourages people to focus on weaknesses while ignoring strengths. Most importantly, it convinces them that growth is less possible than it really is. Changing your internal narrative begins with awareness. Before you can rewrite a story, you must first recognize that it exists. Pay attention to how you describe yourself. Notice the language you use when things go wrong. Observe the explanations you give for your successes and failures. Do you attribute success to luck and failure to personal inadequacy? Do you focus on your mistakes while minimizing your achievements? Do you assume the worst about your future whenever something does not go according to plan? These patterns often reveal the deeper narrative operating beneath the surface. Once you become aware of that narrative, you can begin to question it. Ask yourself whether the story is completely true. Ask yourself whether there are alternative interpretations. Ask yourself whether the narrative reflects your full potential, or merely a limited view of yourself shaped by past experiences. Many people discover that the stories they have carried for years are incomplete. They focus heavily on moments of failure while overlooking moments of resilience. They remember criticism, but forget encouragement. They dwell on setbacks while ignoring the progress they have made. As a result, their self-image becomes distorted. Rewriting your internal narrative does not require you to ignore reality. It requires you to see reality more clearly. A balanced narrative acknowledges mistakes without turning them into identity. It recognizes weaknesses while also recognizing strengths. It accepts challenges without assuming defeat. Most importantly, it leaves room for growth. When you adopt this perspective, the past becomes a source of wisdom rather than a source of limitation. Experiences that once felt like evidence of inadequacy become valuable lessons. Failures become feedback. Challenges become opportunities to develop qualities that would otherwise remain dormant. The story you tell yourself today will influence the person you become tomorrow. That story shapes your confidence, your decisions, your willingness to take risks, and your ability to persist when progress feels slow. It determines whether you see obstacles as permanent barriers or temporary challenges. For that reason, it deserves your attention. You do not need to invent a new identity overnight. You do not need to pretend that every experience has been positive. You simply need to begin telling yourself a more accurate and empowering story. One that acknowledges where you have been while remaining open to where you can go. Because the moment your story changes, your future begins to change with it. Reflection questions. 1. What negative story do you most often tell yourself? 2. When did that story begin? 3. How has it influenced your decisions and actions? 4. Is there evidence that challenges the story? 5. What would a more balanced and empowering narrative sound like? Daily action step. Write down one negative story you have repeated about yourself for years. Then rewrite it from a more objective perspective. Instead of describing yourself through limitations, describe the situation as a challenge you are capable of improving. Read the new version several times throughout the day and notice how it changes the way you think and feel. Success affirmation. I choose to see myself clearly and fairly. My past experiences inform me, but they do not define me. Every day, I am creating a stronger and more empowering story for my future.